I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will give Mr. Desjardins another shot here. I believe we have the technical fixes. You are up, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Wolters, could you just briefly explain the importance of our nuclear weapons capability and how it serves to reassure our allies in deterring these strategic non-nuclear attacks from adversaries like Russia?
Congressman, we've certainly had the nuclear triad in place as a strategic deterrence umbrella in Europe for well over 6 decades. And the prosperous peace that we've been able to enjoy is certainly attributed to that. So it's very important from that standpoint.
If the United States were to adopt a no first use policy, how do you believe this would be perceived or received by our allies?
Congressman, I think you would get a mixed return depending upon the allies' awareness of the nuclear enterprise. And I'm not equipped to give you a country-by-country return on that, but I think you'd get some mixed responses.
Okay. How do you feel about a no first use policy?
Congressman, I currently support the U.S. position on not adhering to the nuclear no first use policy in accordance with the Nuclear Posture Review of 2018.
If we were to adopt such a policy, do you believe that Russia in turn would restrict their own nuclear policy in any substantive way?
Congressman, I'm not sure what Russia would do, but I do know we would probably be in a position to where we wouldn't trust the decision that they make.
Okay. I just have some concerns, and I hope the Biden administration is tuning into this hearing, because in the past, President Biden had expressed his support of a no first use policy, and I hope he would seriously rethink that position and look at what our allies would say. Granted, you said there was a mixed response. Let's turn to Israel for a minute. General, in your statement, you noted that the tremendous strides Israel has made under the Trump administration, normalizing relationships with the Arab world and improving regional security. Do you foresee the momentum of these accomplishments carrying over into this administration?
I do, Congressman.
What are some of the obstacles that you see in continuing these successes, and what can we do to help overcome them?
I think the degree of cooperation for exchange of information is productive. I think that needs to continue. And if we wind up having obstacles in that area, it would be of concern. Right now, the ability to information share with Israel mill to mill is very, very effective.
Ms. Cooper, could you explain the current state of the Department of Defense's assessment regarding a transfer of Israel from European Command to the Central Command area of operations?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. The current state of play is that there was a decision to effect the transfer, but that transfer is still in process, in the sense that we are carefully analyzing every aspect to ensure that only when we are confident that it will be a seamless transition will that formal transition occur. And the concept here is to ensure that there's nothing that is impacted negatively in terms of Israel's tremendous relationship with European allies and with European Command, but only that Israel will benefit from greater access to mill-to-mill relationships in the Central Command area of responsibility. So that's the criteria we're looking at. Over.
Okay, and thank you both for your service and for being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Loria is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And General Wolters, I wanted to shift back to the discussion that some of my colleagues brought up earlier about naval presence in the Eucom theater. And I had an opportunity to discuss this specifically a little bit yesterday with General Van Herk with relative to the Arctic and kind of how the forces are allocated when we look at the Arctic and having 3 combatant commanders whose geographic areas converge on that area. So essentially with U.S. Indo-PACOM, they have a large number of forces assigned, Forces 4. You have some naval forces assigned, but not particularly attributed to that mission, more in tune with conducting ballistic missile defense and operating in the Mediterranean. And U.S. NORTHCOM has 0 naval forces assigned by the Forces 4 document. Can you first describe any additional needs you feel that you have for naval forces? I know you mentioned 2 destroyers earlier, but specifically with regards to the Arctic. And then furthermore, do you have any concerns about the command and control, the operability for sort of a unified command when countering threats in the Arctic because of the 3 combatant commanders having geographic areas that intersect in basically one theater?
Well, Congresswoman, with respect to the command and control between the 3 U.S. combatant commanders, I'm very comfortable. We've operated for decades across unified command plan boundaries, and we understand ADCON, OPCON, and TACON. As far as needs in the region are concerned, from a U.S. perspective, as you well know, through many of your initiatives, we've worked with the Coast Guard, and we plan on going the direction of the addition of 6 additional icebreakers in the future. And I think that's very, very important. And my request with respect to the 2 DDGs has everything to do with the Arctic and what's on the periphery with respect to what happens in the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. I'm very pleased with the European nations' increase in involvement in the Arctic region. The Northern Sea route is very precious to them. It's a treasure that the nations understand that we need to protect it, and they're getting very, very involved with respect to establishing military plans to assist in that cause. So I think the campaign momentum with respect to U.S. activities, all the plans that all the U.S. services have just recently completed for the Arctic strategy, as well as codifying plans on behalf of our allies and partners to assist, is very helpful.
Well, thank you. And can you clarify, are you looking for 2 additional destroyers to be permanently assigned to the Eucom AOR, or are you looking for rotational forces that would deploy from elsewhere on the East Coast?
It's a request for permanence, ma'am.
Permanent. So then wouldn't be 2 on station all the time. It would be a rotational force, but 4 deployed to the European theater.
We currently have a set number of 4, and the request is for 2 additional, and we have infrastructure in place to be able to house all 6 in Rota, Spain.
Okay, understand that. So, going back to the multiple combatant commanders who intersect in the Arctic theater, my question about Second Fleet. So the Navy recently, a few years back, stood up Second Fleet again. And when Admiral Richardson announced the, reestablishment of Second Fleet, he said that this was a fleet that would operate seamlessly from the East Coast of the United States to the Barents Sea. And, that covers 2 theaters, both the NORTHCOM AOR and part of the Eucom AOR. And then recently, the Harry S. Truman operated above the Arctic Circle doing exercises, and I understand that they were under U.S. Eucom command during that exercise. Does the current arrangement with Second Fleet being a numbered fleet that spans 2 combatant command AORs, do you see any operational concerns with that arrangement?
We're very comfortable with that arrangement, and it's done in other domains often. And Second Fleet, coupled with JFC Norfolk, that I know you're familiar with, Congresswoman, we've worked out the C2 relationships in a supported and supporting construct, and I'm very comfortable with the path that we're currently on.
Okay, and then just in the little time remaining, other than the request for 2 additional DDGs, do you feel that you receive adequate naval presence in the Eucom AOR to meet all of your missions on a regular basis?
We could still use some more support in undersea activity, and I would adore the chance to talk to that in a separate venue.
Okay, thank you, and I'll yield back the time remaining.
Thank you. Mr. Gates is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to give our witnesses the opportunity to just discuss the importance of air dominance in Europe.
Congressman, I'll take a stab at that because it's near and dear to my heart. It's a campaign imperative to ensure that we can comprehensively defend and share our responses and achieve effective deterrence in Europe. And it will dramatically improve with the addition of the United States F-35s that start coming into the United Kingdom in the fall of 2021.
And I know that when we make decisions about air platforms, we're often analyzing the entourage effect, how the F-35 can make the rest of the fighting force more capable as the F-35 starts to really take its position as the dominant air platform in Europe with our allies? Can we expect that they'll be able to scale and do more in their own defense as a consequence of that entourage effect that we seem to analyze very closely in our own fighting force?
Absolutely, Congressman. We have 81 F-35s in continent as we speak. We anticipate that we'll get to 450 by 2030. The F-35's contribution at the tactical level and its ability to achieve access is unequaled anywhere in the world, but its contributions at the strategic level for indications and warnings, command and control, and lethality from a mission command standpoint are daunting.
Obviously, the chairman mentioned, we're all concerned about Turkey and their S-400 purchase. Is there another shoe that we expect to drop? Is there anything you've picked up at the mill-to-mill level that should give us cause for concern that U.S. products, U.S. capabilities are diminished in the attractiveness to some of our partners?
Congressman, I haven't. The mill-to-mill relationship that I have with Turkey at this moment remains very strong.
With any other of our partner nations, are there any places where you see that we might ought to give particular focus or attention when it comes to ensuring interoperability and capability with U.S. warfighters in Europe?
We work that every day, Congressman. I think that's a requirement 24/7, 365. I think what we've done recently with respect to the codification of actual plans at the strategic level and at the national level is a forcing function to allow nations to ultimately establish requirements. And that in itself has been very, very helpful so that we don't have unnecessary duplicity, and the alignment of our hardware and software and troopers is what it needs to be to better generate peace. I think we're traversing in the right direction. And truthfully, Congressman, a big contributor in this area has been the European Deterrence Initiative to get after these issues.
No, I appreciate that. I just was giving you the chance if you thought there was any other area where we ought to have this focus, because I know in armed services we had a number of discussions about Turkey's decision before it arose, and maybe we should have done more to ensure that that was the right decision. But it seems as though you're saying there is not something with that level of acuity that we ought to be concerned about. If there is, I would ask that you provide that to our office as part of the record. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. We're currently seeing a rise in liberal and authoritarian states throughout Europe. I know there's been a lot of talk about Turkey, but we also have seen that authoritarian cases in Poland and Hungary, and some of these governments are no longer being reliable or helpful partners. I know we've already talked about the F-35 program with Turkey, but Ms. Cooper, I was wondering, in your assessment, how does the Biden administration plan to update its military partnerships or alliances with states that take repeated actions that go directly against our core interests? And are these authoritarian developments being considered as the department works to implement its plan to realign U.S. force posture in Europe? I'm particularly interested in Poland, where we have a rotating armored brigade combat team.
Thank you. I would say that the Biden administration's policies regarding democracy and regarding the promotion of U.S. values are very strong. And so this is something that we feel not just over at the State Department in Foggy Bottom, but at the Pentagon. So in general, this is an important focus for the administration. With respect to specific alliance relationships, we are still working very hard in the context of the NATO alliance to forge strong capabilities and a strong ability to deter Russian aggression and respond should Russia proceed with aggression. And that is where our NATO-related mill-to-mill investments occur. And in the case of Poland specifically, we do have this rotational presence that we are continuing with.
Thank you. And on the question of Russia, the question for both Ms. Cooper and General Wolters is why you think sanctions are going to work on Russia, since we have put them on in the past and it's not been effective in deterring Russian hacking. And if anything, the problem has gotten worse. And I understand if we need to go into more detail in this in the classified briefing later, but just wondering what the rationale is for continuing a process of sanctions that has seemed, to me at least, fairly ineffective to this point.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I would urge members of Congress to take a close look at the specific sanctions that we are releasing today, because the details in the package, I think, do speak to a level of clarity of purpose and clarity of messaging that perhaps we have not always had. In terms of the new executive order that President Biden is signing, this will enable us to have a tool that we can use not just today, but also in the future to message our deterrence of future Russian malign activities. So I do think it's important to look at the specifics. But it's not just sanctions. I mean, we're not just doing sanctions. And it's coupled with other measures. To include today, we are proceeding with the expulsion of 10 Russian officers in the United States. And most importantly, it revolves around alliance unity. I was very encouraged to see that it wasn't just the voice of the United States today calling out Russian malign actions. It was also NATO, because we have a NATO statement that was issued today. So we are all standing together, unified. This is something that Russia does notice and that can, I think, in the future deter their malign behavior.
Thank you. General, anything to add there?
Congressman, anything we can do to continue to curb malign behavior on behalf of Russia and improve our deterrence posture, I'm in support of.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you both being here. And as a third-year Air Force guy, real proud of General Wolters and all the great work you're doing. My first question is dealing with the Baltics. With what we're seeing with the Russians are doing with Ukraine and Georgia, what can we do more to assure deterrence with our great allies in the Baltics? And part of that, would you consider having a permanent U.S. force in the Baltics to make that deterrence more assured? And I defer to either one.
Sir, great question. Number one, I think the glide path that we're on with enhanced forward presence has been very successful. And I know you're familiar with it, and I know you visited. It affords the NATO nations to lead from the front and participate to a greater degree. I believe that the current rotational presence that we have back and forth from a U.S. perspective with respect to Poland and what we do with the other nations, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, is about right. It continues to promote all involvement for many of our allies and partners, and the success that we're having with those battalion-sized battle groups in each one of those 4 nations, possessing the capability to inherit and input all domain data is improving our ability to adequately deter in that region.
I'm the co-chair of the Baltic Security Caucus, so we put a lot of time on this. I just fear if we ever have conflict in Europe, it's going to probably evolve around the Baltic states. So I just think we have to be so careful to ensure there is no miscalculation by the Russians there. So obviously I'm for strengthening our deterrence capabilities there and leaving any ambiguity out when it comes to that. To the Russian gas question, there are some bases that are reliant on Russian gas. And the reason I know that, we put it in law that the services have to ask for a waiver to do it, and we know the Army has done that. So, for example, the new hospital being built in Germany will be using Russian gas. Does it concern either one of you, or what can we do about this? Because I think when the Russians just turn off the gas, we got a problem.
It does, Congressman, and I'm very familiar with Rhine Ordnance Barrack Hospital and the construction project having commanded the air component at Ramstein being part and parcel of that equation. I think we have to continue with the demanding customer that we have been up to this point to purge it out of the system. And our reliance on that should ultimately be a campaign that drives us to zero.
Thank you. I know you've already talked to some F-35 questions here, but I got to follow up on it. And I was just reading that in some of the training, we're looking at 20-to-1 kill ratios. I even saw one where it was 100-to-1. Would you say the F-35 is unmatched in its capability in your theater?
Yes.
Now, there have been some folks who want to cut the F-35 program. What is the impact to your theater if this F-35 program is reduced in production?
It'll reduce our campaign momentum to more effectively see the environment from an indications and warning standpoint, command and control and provide feedback as to what is taking place in the environment. And from a lethality perspective, the ability to put potential targets at risk will be weakened.
You've flown in the F-35?
I've flown the F-22. I
Okay.
have not flown the F-35.
I was just curious because you could compare and contrast if you had. I got a minute left, so I want to ask one other question on electronic warfare. 4 years ago, when we took stock of electronic warfare, we were behind Russia and China. We stepped away from it from the mid-'90s. We've put a lot of emphasis in this committee on trying to get this on track. Are you seeing the work bearing fruit over the last 4 years? Are we right-sizing our electronic warfare program?
Congressman, we're improving, probably not at a rate that pleases you or I, and the acquisition and the proliferation of the F-35 will actually help in that arena.
Okay. Well, thank you. I yield back, and I appreciate you both.
I do apologize for this, but I'm used the chair's prerogative to follow up a little bit. What impact? I mean, the F-35 is $38,000 an hour right now. We wanted to get it at $25,000 an hour. Its mission-ready capability is sub 50% at the moment, and by 2030, the engine is requiring so much repairs that roughly half the fleet won't be able to go just because we don't have the facilities to repair the engines, and we won't have enough engines. If that is the capability that you're getting, $38,000 an hour, 33% to 40% capability rate, sinking down because it doesn't have a functioning engine, how will that impact your ability to do what you need to do in Europe?
Congressman, that will certainly have an impact, but we weigh it all together given what effect can be delivered in the battle space, but obviously it would have an impact.
So it would be helpful if this committee would put pressure on those making the F-35 to actually deliver the product that they told us they were going to deliver at the price that they told us that they were going to deliver it at. And it would not be helpful to simply give them a free pass on those important issues.
Chairman, I applaud your efforts up to this point in that category, and I don't argue with any of those points.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That was more rhetorical than anything, but that's what I hope this committee will do. I mean, the platform's fantastic. There isn't any question about that. We are right now not getting what we are paying for, and that's not good for defense, and it certainly isn't good for the taxpayer. With that, I will yield to Ms. Strickland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I'd like to talk a bit about protecting service members and their families when they're deployed, especially given how the Kremlin and other adversaries are targeting them with misinformation and disinformation. So I understand that when service members are deployed in Eucom's AOR, that Russian disinformation campaigns are especially interested in service members and their families. Can you discuss, as much as you can in this open setting, what Eucom is doing to combat disinformation, how we're educating service members, and how we're improving their awareness of this possibility? Thank you.
Thanks, Congresswoman. That's a great question. Again, we've instituted programs with the assistance of Special Operations Command that start at the very top at the strategic level to go after malign influence and misinformation to active duty members, reservists, guardsmen, and their dependents. The Operation Influence platform is specifically designed to target misinformation at the strategic and operational levels from Russia. And we've got a follow-on program called WebOps that takes it even further to make sure that there's a heightened awareness on behalf of all of the military members and the dependents in the Eucom AOR about the malign influence from the information domain with respect to Russia.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper?
Well, I can just add to this at the strategic level in terms of the whole of government effort that we have to counter Russian disinformation. And actually, this is something that General Wolters plays a leadership role in because he is the co-chair with the State Department of the Russia Influence Group. And so even as we're dealing with these issues at the local level, at the installation level, at the individual level, at the strategic level, our focus is on improving whole of government coordination to address Russian disinformation.
Great. And can you talk a bit more about the families? Because sometimes they can be vulnerable, especially when their loved ones are deployed.
We have the luxury of hosting families in Europe for decades and decades. And this is a constant challenge to make sure that the military members conduct town hall meetings at the commander level and the lower levels to ensure that there is no degree of satisfaction when just the military member is informed. The mission isn't complete until the rest of the family members are. And we obviously use 21st century means to get that word out. But it's like anything else, Congresswoman, you have to rebrief the same subject about 10 times to convince yourself that the word is actually out. And we find ourselves in situations to where we have to be comprehensive from a town hall perspective to make sure that we can go person to person to get the word out. And it's been a little bit challenging as a result of COVID-19 conditions. And I think this is driving a lot of your questions. And we have worked very hard to conduct town hall meetings with restrictions applied from a COVID perspective and are having success.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. And we know that in general, messages start to sink in when we do repeat them. So I appreciate your repetition strategy. That's all I have. I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Waltz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you both.
I don't think your microphone is on there.
How are we doing now? Yeah, there we are. All right. Hey, thank you for both being here. I want to talk to you about our European partners, our NATO partners' significant contributions to Afghanistan over the last couple of decades. Ms. Cooper and I have spent many efforts working with them to live up to those contributions and live up to those pledges. And fortunately, I actually had more troops on the ground than the United States until the announcement yesterday. I'm hearing from many of my colleagues and then also reading about grumbling and discontent and concern, frankly, from particularly from the Czechs, the Belgians, some of the Eastern European states, and those that were affected so directly by the precipitous pullout of Iraq. When ISIS then came charging to the fore, we had a caliphate the size of Indiana, attacks into and around Europe, into European capitals. The intelligence community has been clear that terrorism loves a vacuum. Al-Qaeda is very likely to take advantage of that vacuum in the wake of our withdrawal. What are you hearing from a military standpoint, and also to your military-to-military contacts on the civilian side? Are those concerns mirroring what I'm hearing in terms of Europe's safety, number one, but then number two, our ability to effect a CT fight over, with this term, over the horizon, noting the differences of our basing options in and around Iraq are very different and far greater than they are without Bagram in Afghanistan.
First and foremost, Congressman, and I know you appreciate this, as the United States, we are incredibly grateful for the contributions of all the nations. And secondly, with this being a order, we will conduct a deliberate, very well synchronized, and very safe from a force protection standpoint withdrawal. Yesterday, as you may have heard at the North Atlantic Council, the Secretary General convened all of the members of the alliance to include the partner nations that have an impact in the region, and the support was resounding for enactment of the withdrawal.
And Congressman, I would just add that kind of at the policy level, so the feedback that I have heard from my colleagues who have been traveling with the Secretary and were there in Brussels for this meeting is a sense of appreciation by allies for the manner in which we have consulted with them since the beginning of this administration to take into account their perspectives, to have Secretary Austin and Secretary Biden personally engaging with them in person, and also the sense that they also have been reflecting on the way ahead and concerned about the future of the mission even before this. And I think moving forward.
So, Ms. Cooper, yeah, go ahead. That's the part I want to talk about moving forward.
I think moving forward, the expectation, and I think it's an expectation that we will absolutely meet, is for this very close consultation process to continue every step of the way, so that we are working on this withdrawal plan and we are executing it absolutely together as an alliance.
Our European partners will be the first to feel the consequences of this decision. If history bears true in what they felt with the withdrawal of Iraq and the ISIS caliphate. So I certainly hope those consultations are ongoing, but I do not see a plan in place and basing options for continuing counterterrorism operations. Are the Europeans planning to contend or to participate in those operations with us as they have in Syria? What's the plan?
We'll start and conduct a synchronized withdrawal, and the intention of the European nations is obviously by, with, and through those nations, to be determined.
Okay, so the plan is TBD, to be determined. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. VC is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. General Wolters, can you talk a little bit about Russia's military modernization program and what modernization efforts are most important for us to focus on to reduce operational risk in your command?
The one that is of most concern, Congressman, is the long-range missile capability. And we at NATO are very focused on that. We certainly, from a U.S. perspective, are focused on that. And the key for us is to continue to improve our ability from an indications and warning standpoint and from a command and control standpoint to make sure that we can characterize the environment and be able to respond. That's probably the biggest concern, Congressman.
No, thank you very much. Last week, I was at a rollout ceremony in Fort Worth with the Danish military receiving F-35s. And as you know, they're obviously one of our key allies and participants in the F-35 program. And I was just wondering what was your opinion on the F-35 and the impact that it's had both militarily and diplomatically with our allies in the region.
Congressman, we're very fond of the F-35 because of its contributions to indications and warnings and command and control and lethality. The nations in Europe have been very happy with the product. We actually have just over 80 F-35s, non-U.S., in Europe as we speak, and we will soon get U.S. F-35s to the United Kingdom in the fall timeframe. And we are currently programmed to go up to approximately 450 F-35s by 2030 throughout all of Europe. We're very pleased with its performance, and we're very pleased with its contributions to deterrence.
And I hate to ask you to go back too far into the history vault, but with other platforms where there have been issues and that the military has had to work with to perfect, whether it has been a plane, a helicopter, battleship, regardless of what it is, for the mission that you need for F-35 to perform for you right now, and you go back and you look at other platforms where you've also had to work with them until they could perform at the rate that you wanted them to. Where do you see this platform at right now versus, again, just other problems in the past that you had to correct? I mean, I remember when I was, at the beginning of the V-22, for instance, that there were some serious issues with that. But Bell Helicopter eventually got that right, and it's gone on to become a good platform, for the Marines and other branches. And so, could you just sort of touch on that a little bit?
Congressman, the other platforms that I've seen during my service in the military, we've had the same experiences. And if I were to rate the F-35 with others, I would just tell you that they're similar.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Bice is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The questions I have may be better served in the classified hearing, but I'll go ahead and just throw them out there now. I really want to hear, we've talked a lot about the F-35, and certainly I could maybe ask some additional questions, but I really would like to know about how you are battling the cyber issues that are happening with our adversaries, especially as it relates to Russia and what's happening in that part of the region.
Congresswoman, I think that the question had to do with malign influence on behalf of adversaries with respect to cyber. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I'll just start out by saying that the posture in Europe has improved significantly. As far as the organizations that we have from a U.S. Eucom perspective, we have a joint cyber center. I have an integrated planning element, and with my SACEUR hat, I have a SHAPE Cyber Operations Center. And those three organizations come to a total of about 150 individuals. On top of that, we have cyber protection teams in the United States, manned by the United States Army at Fort Gordon. And many of the nations in Europe today are forming cyber organizations from a military perspective. And I believe that because several years ago, the United States made the decision to establish one military commander for cyber, the U.S. Cybercom commander. Our direction and guidance has been much clearer, with much less ambiguity, and the command and control and the organization of our units is much better. So we're improving, and the NATO nations are watching that improvement, and they are following in suit, and we are seeing a marked improvement on behalf of our NATO militaries to improve our effectiveness, number one, to better defend on the network, and then number two, worry about the other aspects of cyber after that, once they're convinced that their nations and their militaries and their whole of governments have effective network defense.
And if I may, I think it might be helpful to offer a national level perspective on this cyber question. And I think the Solar Winds response that we announced today is really a microcosm of how we handle cyber issues at the national level. There's a piece of this that relates to specifically disrupting and imposing costs on Russian cyber actors. So what you're seeing today is that we are sanctioning 6 specific Russian companies that support the Russian intelligence services. This is the SVR. So we're actually sanctioning these specific companies. Then you also see an element of this that relates to raising awareness and providing the private sector with the information and tools they need to be able to protect themselves. So there's an aspect of that with the Solar Winds response. And then there's a building partner capacity piece, where we're working with our allies and partners to help them become more resilient. And we have expanded our own cyber flag exercise that is, one of our premier cyber exercises, to include several allies as part of this response.
And a follow-up to that, do you feel like it would be in our best interest to invest more in this specific space to help mitigate some of the things that we're seeing?
I would say this is a whole of government space. So I think we have to be looking at not just the Defense Department, but at our civilian agency counterparts and their investments in this space. And then it's also about the private sector. We have to partner with the private sector. We have to share information with the private sector. And we also have to encourage the private sector to make themselves more resilient. That's also why today we are reaching out to the private sector and encouraging U.S. and international companies to not rely on Russian software providers, Russian IT companies, because this can lead to a critical vulnerability.
we may want to add China to that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you very much. We have 4 people left and 10 minutes. The math doesn't quite add up, but if those 4 people move through quickly, we hopefully will be able to get to all 4, but we do have to stop at 1:20. With that announcement, Mr. Panetta is recognized.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And thanks to our witnesses for being here, as well as, and of course, your service. Look, in November of 2020, I got to say I was and a number of other of my colleagues were absolutely disappointed by the withdrawal of the United States from the Open Skies Treaty, which basically we saw the consequences of Russia withdrawing as well. I think some of the best examples of the benefits of the Open Skies Treaty were in 2014, when we were able to confirm the deployment of thousands of troops, Russian troops, near the Ukrainian border, as well as in 2018, when we conducted a flight following the unprovoked Russian attack of Ukrainian vessels in the Kerch Strait. I do believe that the treaty is worth it, based not only on the images, but to the value that our allies have in it, especially our Eastern European partners and friends. That's why I introduced the Open Skies Stability Act, to let our allies know that we in Congress felt that way about the Open Skies Treaty and the value that it brings to the stability and peace, especially of Europe. My question to you is, what do you feel the future is of the Open Skies Treaty for the remaining 32 members? And does it serve a purpose without the participation of the United States and Russia?
I will attempt to answer this quickly, Congressman, given the time, but this is actually a very complex subject. And since it was actually my office that led the charge on that flight that you mentioned over Ukraine after the Kerch Strait attack, this is near and dear to my heart. What I will say to you is that, first of all, we have been very open to consultations with allies and partners on the range of conventional arms control requirements and concerns, to include the Open Skies Treaty. And we have, the Biden administration has reached out to allies to open this dialogue as the administration considers the way forward on all arms control agreements. So I think that's very important to note, and I think that's something that allies have appreciated. I will say, though, that from an intelligence value, the Open Skies Treaty does have very limited intelligence value for the United States. And even in that instance that I was very proud of, actually, where we had that imagery following the Kerch Strait attack, we haven't necessarily been able to capitalize on the benefits of those opportunities. So at this point, we are in consultation with allies. We know that Russia values flying over the U.S. homeland as part of the treaty. And I certainly can't speak to whether Russia would actually come back into compliance, which is really the core issue here. Russia has given us no indication that it would be willing to come back into compliance.
General Wolters?
Congressman, I concur with Laura Cooper's comments on the consultation with allies, and I've received the same reflections. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Knowing that the other questions, I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Franklin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses here this morning. You covered a lot of ground on the unclass level, and I do have some things I want to dive into deeper. But just quickly for General Wolters, we haven't discussed sea lift, strategic sea lift. It's often an area that gets overlooked. But could you talk a little bit about the role strategic sea lift plays in our efforts to deter Russia, an assessment of our capabilities, and do we have the tools necessary for you to implement strategy in Eucom AOR?
We do, Congressman, but it relies on advanced warning, and as you know, our TRANSCOM commander works this issues every second of the day. We were able to test sea lift to a certain degree with Defender Europe 20. We didn't get the full, complete test. We certainly have some challenges, but when we have good indications and warnings, and we can move our operations farther and farther to the left to supply, we can typically wind up putting ourselves in a position to where we can put resources where they need to be effective. And right now, for what is required on the European continent, we can be effective.
Very good. Thank you, General. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, very, very good witness. Thank you for the testimony. Ms. Cooper, thank you. Particularly delighted to see the sanctions coming at a very, very important moment, having to do with Ukraine and other things that Russia up to now, let alone what they've been doing in the past. A very good message. My recollection is that every year or every other year, the Russians do an exercise in the western part of their country, north one year, south the next year. This is the south year?
It is, Congressman.
Okay. I don't expect an answer now, but I want in detail, because of the work that we need to do in the NDAA, the posture in Europe with regard to EDI and the specific MILCON and other issues. Some $1.7 billion was removed last year and the year before in that area. Do we replace it or not? It's a long answer, and I'll take it in yes, General.
36 projects at $1.6 billion, and we're working very, very hard to execute 34 of the 36. But obviously, it depends on future budget. But we're on course to go that direction.
Very good. We need the details. Also, President Trump said he was going to move a whole lot of things out of Europe and into Europe and other places. Has that been reversed? If so, what do we do? And where does the future go, Ms. Cooper?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I will just say that on posture in general, there is a global posture review that is kicking off right now in the Pentagon. And so we will be studying all of these issues, global posture, and this summer we will have the Biden administration's conclusions. But with respect specifically to Europe, President Biden did lift the troop cap in Germany. He announced that at the Munich Security Conference. And then we were talking earlier today about the 500 additional forces that Secretary Austin just announced for Germany.
I understand, and there are many other things also in play. So your timing doesn't quite work out with our timing. So let's coordinate our timing with regard to these issues. And finally, the issue of NATO. It appears as though there is a sea change from disrespecting NATO to respecting NATO and working with NATO. Is that correct?
The Biden administration has been very clear that NATO and alliances are central to its policy, and I think our allies have responded very appreciatively.
General, would you like to comment?
Congressman, I've seen no breakdown in trust of our NATO nations with the United States.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Wolters, it's an honor to be with you. And I particularly appreciated I'm the grateful son of a flying tiger who served in India and China during World War II. And I know the difference you can make on behalf of promoting freedom and liberty. Additionally, I'm very grateful that I had led a delegation, General, to Poland in 2017. I was there gratefully with Congressman Garamendi. And in Poland, visiting with our personnel at Operation Atlantic Resolve, it's been so inspiring, and that has a personal connection too. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer Miskowicz, her heritage is Krakow, Poland. And so to see us working together with our Polish allies, how important it is. And what is the most recent progress that's been made with the joint declaration that we have with our headquarters and possibly to have a headquarters unit in Poland?
Congressman, all those efforts with the enhanced defense cooperation agreement with Poland are in work. We've received tremendous contributions from Poland with respect to working some of our construction projects, and we're very excited about the status of the 5th Floor Command Post coming in and Poland's willingness to work on their infrastructure to receive our rotational forces and the improvements that they've made on their ranges. So we're traversing in a very good direction with Poland.
Well, it is so inspiring to be there and visit with our Polish allies. And for Secretary Cooper, I'm so pleased that with the Biden administration indicating a clear association with our allies of Ukraine and also Moldova, additionally Poland, Georgia, working with Romania and Bulgaria. I appreciate the President's restatement of our appreciation in all of these countries. And with that, what can we do to be more effective in our working with our allies of Eastern Europe?
Congressman, I think that we are on the right track to work with our allies both to build their capacity to be able to be resilient against their near threat, Russia, but also to be interoperable with U.S. forces and with NATO. So I feel like we have the right mix of train and equip programs. We also need to be vocal in our support of them. Right now, with the pressure that Ukraine is facing, Ukraine has really appreciated not just the fact that we're providing them with tremendous high-quality equipment and high-quality training, but the fact that we're publicly vocal in our support of their sovereignty.
Well, thank you for your efforts, and it's been inspiring to visit Novo Selo, the joint NATO-Bulgarian-American base. It's exciting to see our allies working together. Thank you for your service. I yield back.
Thank you. We are a couple minutes over time here, and we got to get over for the classified briefing. So I just want to close with one quick thing, and that is I really want to thank the staff. You know, we've made a couple jokes about the technological issues here. It's not easy. And the staff has really made this work in a way that has been enormously helpful. So I really appreciate the technological wizards who have enabled us to continue to do the hybrid hearings the way we've done them. So, and appreciate you sitting through all of that. And we'll give you just a brief little break before we reconvene at 2 o'clock in the CVC. With that, we are adjourned.